It's my pleasure to introduce two of America's most innovative and creative leaders. He's the Senior Vice President and Chief Social Impact Officer for Cisco, and she's the U.S. CEO for Edelman. Please help me welcome Brian Tippins and Lisa Ross Osborne.
It is great to see there's still so much great energy in the room, and what better way to bring this to a close. We are going to bring you to the final stretch and bring together and synthesize a lot of the messages that you've heard over the last couple of days. And who better to join us to do this than Lisa Osborne Ross, CEO of Edelman US, who is, by the way, if John was out here, I'm surprised he's not out here. If John was out here, John Bryant would say something like, "This is a bad sister," he would say. SISTA, the first black woman to lead a major PR firm in history. So let's give it up for Lisa.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. We're going to talk about kind of the changing nature of brands and community engagement. And again, bringing together a lot of the themes that you've heard over the last couple of days as we bring this to an end. But we always want to start with the origin story. Every hero has an origin story. We'll talk about Edelman. We'll talk about some of the current landscape for corporate America. But tell us about Lisa. Tell us about your origin.
My origin is almost summed up in what I've experienced today at this conference. The speakers that I have listened to previously, and particularly the last two, but my parents were two HBCU grads that met at Howard University. They're both deceased, and so I can freely say that my father was clear. He was on campus for a party, and my mother was looking for a husband. And 38 years later, before my dad passed, I think they both did all right. But what they taught us in the origin for me is really, again, what I've experienced here, that it's about trust, it's about relationships, and it's about kindness. And kindness is something that I think that we forget the importance of. And Brian, as you and I have talked and John talked about, it's also about faith. It's about faith in each other. It's about believing that collectively we can make the world a better place, that if we trust each other and if we build relationships, that good things happen. And so that's my origin story. You know, I'm one of four. I'm the youngest. I'm the only girl. I was educated by feminist nuns when I was in high school. I went to Marquette University, so I believe in the Jesuit approach to social justice. And I try to surround myself with really good people like Brian, who has become a lovely friend and a lovely compatriot in this effort to really bring about change in a significant way.
Definitely. Those are important lessons. You said kindness, trust, focus on justice. You took those lessons into your professional career.
Absolutely.
At Ogilvy in the firm, sometime in the Clinton administration. Talk about your path that brought you to the CEO role at Edelman.
I've always known that I could make a difference. I've recently said in a magazine article that my parents gave me the greatest gift of being unencumbered. For so many black children, our parents tell us, you're not going to be wanted in a room. You're going to have to work 50 times harder. People are going to question you. And my parents knew that to be true, but what they said to me was, go in there, do your thing, have fun, make some money, make a difference, and keep it moving. And that was a gift for me. So I'm a native Washingtonian. I'm trying very hard not to be distracted by my microphone, which is making me sound double, I think. I grew up in DC. I went to a girls' prep school. I went to Marquette University. I met my husband working for a trade association. I went to Ogilvy. I worked at Fleischman Hillard. I was in the Clinton administration for 8 years, working for Alexis Herman, the great Alexis Herman. I experienced Dorothy Height. I've worked with some of the greatest, but also most humble minds in business and in industry. And rooted in, again, my parents' belief that you can do well and do good, I ended up here at Edelman. And our belief, and I think what we're going to talk about today, is that brands and corporations not only have an opportunity, but have the responsibility to drive social change, to make things better, to do things that benefit the people who use their products and services. And every day I seek to work with those organizations and work with those brands to see what difference we can make. And for me, that's a good day.
So we've talked a lot in the last day and a half about representation generally across all industries, financial services, tech industry, all industries. Why does representation matter so much in the industry that you're in? I'm guessing there's not a lot of very senior executives in PR that look like you, right? Why is that important? Why does that matter?
I'm not unencumbered enough to give you examples, but you've seen campaigns where women are not at the table and they say and do something stupid. That people of color are not at the table and they say and do something stupid. And I often say that representation we've been talking about for years, but it matters because it also can save lives. We have a campaign that we did for Vaseline called See My Skin. And historically, if you had a psoriasis or eczema or some sort of skin disease, dermatological problem, you could go online, and if you were a person of color, you would not see any skin that looked like yours. But because we had representation at the table with the client and at Edelman, we said, this is dangerous. And so we started a campaign with Vaseline called See My Skin, where now, not only when you go online and you type in eczema, you will see skin that looks like mine, but you will also see resources and information that you can go to directly, and you will also have a list of Black and brown doctors that know how to treat your skin. And so without representation, not only does it not feel good, it's also dangerous.
It's also dangerous.
And lives can be lost if people are not there to advocate for those that don't look like, or that look like them, but who are not represented.
You've been in the role of CEO 2 years now?
2 years.
So you came in at an interesting time. Well, you were already with Edelman at the time, but in the last couple of years, as we've reflected on over the last couple of days, in the wake of the tragic murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, businesses shift. Corporate America shifted significantly. How have you seen the landscape of corporate America when it comes to brand and brand advocacy? How have you seen it change over the last couple of years?
I mean, it's changed dramatically. One, there's a conversation. Two, and I'm often asked this question, after George Floyd was murdered, and it was right after COVID, and so people were struggling anyway. It was hard, hard, hard. And then, we began this racial reckoning, and probably one of the richest periods of my professional career was those 4 or 5 months afterwards, where I was talking to CEOs of Fortune, 50 companies. And they were trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. And for many of them, it was easy to put Black Lives Matter on their website, but the question is, will you also put a bumper sticker on your car? Will you put a yard sign that says it? And while corporations did well, the change came about from those CEOs whose lives changed as a result of this. They broadened their horizons. They introduced themselves to people that they didn't routinely know. They acknowledged what they didn't know and were willing to learn. And so, the money poured in, and I'm never going to say money doesn't matter, but it's the mindset that has to change. And for those corporations who shifted in that degree, I think we're better off for it, and I think we just have to keep pushing to ensure.
You said the money poured in. Did the money really pour in? Did enough money pour in? Did these promises and proposals that were made by corporate America 2 years ago come to fruition broadly?
you know, you can't correct 400 years of issue in a year. So it just doesn't work like that. And for those of us who work with a lot of money, we sometimes mistakenly believe that money can solve everything, and it can't.
Right.
It is important, and it can solve a lot, but everything has to come into place. And I watched leaders evolve where they were asking questions that perhaps they should have had the answer to, and now they're teaching. But I also think we learned as a society about something else that my parents drilled into us, and that's the importance of grace. No one has all the answers, and we do have to put ourselves in a position where we can have positive conversations, but we have to be careful about creating environments where if you make one false move, you're canceled. You are afraid to ask a question, and if you're afraid to ask a question, that means you can't learn. And I often said that those corporations and those leaders that will do well are those who have a pure heart but thick skin. And you have to be willing to learn, but if there's something that you don't know, imagine that there's something that someone else doesn't know, and you have to give grace to have the conversation. And when you don't, that's when people shut down and nothing gets done.
It's all quite sensitive, though. You talked about the CEOs and the fear of being canceled. There was a presentation earlier we all saw where Alan Murray from Fortune magazine interviewed Mulvaney, and they were talking about the extent to which corporations now are weighing in on political issues, right? Very similar in terms of the role of the CEO weighing in on all these emerging environmental, social, governance issues. Talk about the role, as you think about the brands of the company, the role of the CEO and how that's evolving, speaking out on issues.
When COVID happened, one of my colleagues renamed the CEO rather than saying it's the chief executive officer, it's the chief empathy officer. And what is now required of CEOs, and I feel it every day in my work, is you obviously have to run a P&L, you obviously have to be profitable, but our research shows that you have to have an opinion, you have to have a point of view, and you have to be willing to engage in a conversation. But this is where the grace comes in, because there are very few issues that everyone in this room would agree to. We all have different points of view. We're from different parts of the country. We have different ideological opinions. But right is right and wrong is wrong. And CEOs are now required to speak out and to say something, and the consequences are real. We're all fighting for talent, and the talent that we are looking at is of a cohort that expects you to say something. Even if they disagree with what you're saying, they expect you to weigh in and to engage.
So I'm going to ask you about what Edelman is doing around solutions broadly, and I'll give you a chance to talk about Mighty Dream. But I want to ask you first, because you talked about the CEO changing to Chief Empathy Officer, this idea that the words matter, right, and that the language matters. I was for a time, I'm with Cisco now as Chief Social Impact Officer, but for a time I was the Chief Diversity Officer at HP. And we went from diversity to diversity inclusion. Then we changed the team to inclusion and diversity for a deliberate reason. I've seen many of my peers go from diversity leaders to diversity, equity, and inclusion. My peer at Salesforce was a chief equality officer, belonging officer, right? You've all seen this kind of evolution in the titles. Do you think that the language around diversity and inclusion, does it matter? Am I being too sensitive about it? Or is there a message behind the language?
No, I mean, I forgot I was on stage and rolled my eyes while you were
And
listing
the camera
all
caught
that.
it too. You catch that eye roll?
Yeah, it was an eye roll because language does matter, but actions matter more. I mean, all the time we spend talking about, is it inclusion, is it diversity? I use representation, respect, recognition. Those are the three things that I try to drive at Edelman. But while we spend all this time talking about things, it's the actions that matter. You know, is your board representative? Is not your workforce, but your senior most talent representative? Are they at the table? Are they asking and answering questions? And so I think we just spend so much time talking to hear ourselves talk, or we could actually be putting some money down, hiring some people, lifting people up in a positive way so that we know automatically that while we're sitting on this stage today, who's going to be on the stage tomorrow and 5 years from now and 5 years from now? Like this young man right here, like he looks young to me, but everybody's starting to look young to me. But our responsibility is not to like talk about whether it's a DEI person, but to identify someone and say, hey, you look really bright and you look like you could make a difference and you could make money while you're doing it. And so he said, yes, that's true about me. But that's what this room can do, is to make a difference by identifying talent and lifting people up and putting them in a position to make a difference.
I completely agree. I think one of the biggest errors in diversity and inclusion is the measurements around representation and that being the only driver, right? It's certainly very important. Anything that's important in business, we have to measure. What gets measured gets done. We have to see reds and yellows and greens on a scorecard. But what's more important is those actions that drive sustained long-term change. I completely agree.
Yes.
In that vein, tell me about A Mighty Dream.
Mighty Dream is a brainchild with me and Pharrell Williams. We met, and his passion for changing the world was so apparent, and we just connected and thought if we put our resources together, his voice, his platform, Edelman's expertise in communications, that we could do something. So we created a thing called Mighty Dream, and it's rooted in Langston Hughes' poem, A Dream Deferred, that written in the 30s, it was a recognition that the American dream has to be available, readily available to everyone and not just certain people. And it wasn't in the 30s, and it still isn't now. It's better. We would be silly to acknowledge or not acknowledge that it is. It's better. But the concept of a mighty dream is that we could create a creative advocacy agency to literally say to brands and corporations, the community saying to brands and corporations, this is what I need. This is where and how you can make a difference. There's a paradigm shift where historically it's been generous brands like mine and the ones that I represent that say, hey, community advocacy group or HBCU, this is what I have for you. But the change is the community is saying, this is what I need, and let's co-create what I need. I went to Cup Foods where George Floyd was murdered this past summer. And I don't know how many of you have been, but after all of this conversation, discussion, media attention, everything, Cup Foods looks the same. There were 13 types of potato chips, and I found one rotten tomato. So if you want to drive change that matters, and look at things like food insecurity. Look at things like joblessness. Look at training. But who knows better what's needed? Those people who are affected. And so Mighty Dream is literally community advocacy organizations saying, this is what I need, and we pair them with brands and corporations, and they do wonderful things. And it is fueled by HBCU grads, so that my goal is in 5 or 10 years, I've got a pipeline of people. And otherwise, I have failed. This job means absolutely nothing if I'm the last person that looks like me in it. And that's my commitment.
That's amazing and admirable that you take seriously the role that you play at the helm of this amazing organization. I'm going to end where we started with a little bit more of your origin story and your tie back to the civil rights movement. So John has reminded us a few times from this stage that we're sitting in this ballroom where in 1967, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King had his last meeting with his organizing committee before he left on the Poor People's Campaign and was never able to return. We were joined by Ambassador Young yesterday, the icons of the movement. We know we stand on the shoulders of giants. My wife Josette and I had the opportunity to go to Chicago to go visit with Reverend Jesse Jackson a few weeks ago. He turned 81 years old and still in the fight, right? Tell us about your connection to the movement. Tell us about Rosa Parks.
Oh, that's so crazy. So I'll tell you about Rosa Parks, but before I do, I don't want to leave the stage without talking a little bit about Brian.
Okay.
Brian is one of these quiet movers and shakers who is behind the scenes, just bam, like getting it done, changing things, moving people around, speaking truth to power. And he's brand new at Cisco. I cannot wait to see what kind of fire he lights over there.
I appreciate that.
And I'm just really grateful to share the stage with you. So for
I appreciate
Brian,
that.
before.
Thank you very much. You're very kind.
Rosa Parks, I so wish my parents were alive to see my life right now because it's so much of what they ordained for me. But I was recently, Essence Magazine did a piece about my role at Edelman and in communications and the importance of representation. And I said that I had learned so much from so many people, sometimes when they weren't even speaking. And so when I was, I think, like 28, 29 years old, I spent 3 days with Rosa Parks. I was with another agency. And I talked about it. And then a friend of mine, a brilliant photographer named Jason Michelot Johnson, just sent me a picture of me and Rosa Parks at a restaurant. And I didn't even know it existed. I have Farrah Fawcett hair, which was a reminder. I'm so glad I cut my hair. I just saw that and was like, that's a lot of work. And there was this beautiful, physically small woman who, even at that age and stage in her life, filled up the room and filled up the screen. And she just talked while we were there. And I thank God I had enough sense to listen and to take in every single thing that she said. And so it is people like Rosa Parks, it's people like your parents and your grandparents, regardless of what color you are or what your politics are. It's Thelma Little Osborne, it's Daniel Osborne, my parents, your parents. And when you come from stock that tells you walk into a room, make a difference, do your thing, and bring other people along, then you really have no choice but to do what all of us in this room are doing. So thank you.
Very powerful. I told you, and I lived up to my promise, this is a bad sister, right? So please join me in thanking Lisa Osborne Ross. Thank you.